Welcome to the Center Collaborative, Creative Solutions in Behavioral Health and Criminal Justice, brought to you by the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, which is also known as the Center. We at the Center are all about solutions. Our job in Oregon is to facilitate improvement of the system so behavioral health and criminal justice can work better together to engage people in treatment while promoting public safety. I am your host, Chris Thomas. I hold a master's degree in clinical psychology and have focused on the intersection between behavioral health and criminal justice for 20 years. Over 7 of those years were behind the walls of a maximum security prison. During this podcast, you will have the opportunity to sit in on real, in-depth conversations with experts about complex topics in a way that is both fascinating and digestible. We will focus not just on what is wrong with the system, but what is going right and how we can work together to evolve. This podcast is a conversation in a series of conversations where we touch on people's legal rights and their options related to seeking medical care. Since our conversations are intended for informational and educational purposes only, they are not a substitute for or a reason to delay seeking professional legal or medical advice. Today on the podcast, we have with us Tyler Reddington. He is a sergeant with Pendleton PD and the peer team coordinator. Dr. Lindsay Tice, she is a psychologist. And Kevin Coleman, retired firefighter for Pendleton and chaplain for the fire department. Welcome, Lindsay, Tyler, and Kevin. It is wonderful to have you with us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
To start off, I think the listening audience would really appreciate hearing why the peer support team you started in Pendleton was so helpful to the fire and police department there.
So it's still a work in progress, actually. Good question. We're still trying to make it even more helpful. Several years ago, me and Kevin talked to each other about developing a peer team because we would have critical incidents within the agency that we just didn't have a good response to. Not that the agency themselves wouldn't handle the response well, but then how are we taking care of our people afterward? I had started working with Kevin about just doing some peer stuff. The problem that I found that a lot of the trauma that was going on was stuff that I was involved in personally myself. So we started trying to build a team, and we were able to get the agency to put more people on our team. And now we've put Dr. Tice on our team as well. So I would say that how we've helped is really yet to be seen. We've done some good things along the way, but really where we're going is probably the more exciting piece of our team, really.
So for our listening audience, I just want to make sure that I'm clear what peer support is and they understand. Firefighters and police can see and experience some pretty traumatic experiences during their lines of work. And while the departments are debriefing the incidents and trying to take care of their folks, there's a lot of trauma that goes along with it. And it's difficult to be able to work through the trauma when you're the one experiencing the trauma. So this was a way for you to come together and collaborate on a way to work through trauma together. Am I clear on that?
Yeah. So the fire department and the police department often experience the same traumatic events. It made sense that we had a team of people who were involved on both sides so that one traumatic incident, we could be there to support the first responders on the front lines dealing with those situations.
As a chaplain, Kevin, I'm wondering if you want to add anything to that around wellness, what you've seen in the fire department and coming together in collaboration.
Yeah, and Tyler was alluding to the fact that we work close together with the police, fire, and EMS because we're under the same covering of the city of Pendleton. But when we get called to an emergency situation, the law enforcement officers get called to the same situation and experience the same thing. As a chaplain, I kind of look at it through a different lens. I see how it affects both sides, not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually, if you will. And I thought it was important to be able to provide a all-inclusive aspect from my experience to the team. And when Tyler contacted me about it, I was all in, thought it would be a great thing. To give you a little history, when I started doing this back in 93, I was a volunteer at the time, and we were experiencing some pretty traumatic events up on the mountain, which is just a few miles away. a lot of deaths, and guys weren't dealing with it very well. And we actually lost a few guys. They went out with the traumatic situations they were dealing with. Me personally, I wanted to see something happen. And I went to the chief and asked him about going to some training for critical incident stress debriefing. And unfortunately, back then, he said, well, Kevin, I don't believe in that stuff, but if you do, then I'll let you go to the training. And that kind of set me back a little bit as to the mindset of the old thought process. It has been an uphill battle from that point on, trying to get people to understand that not only is your physical health important, but your mental and spiritual health is very important to your success and to be able to have a successful career that's not going to end in a bad way. And so when Tyler approached me, I was all in, and I was happy to see that we could come together and make this collaboration. And then when Dr. Tice came in as well, that really added a superior element to this process.
Quite a movement from what it used to be to how folks are viewing peer support, being there for each other now, and mental health in the working environment. Dr. Tice, I'm wondering if you want to add your perspective to that on the importance of peer support and the evolution over the years on how we take care of ourselves as first responders. And with that, I'm including firefighters and police and behavioral health folks that respond as well, because we're all seeing some pretty gnarly stuff. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
This is actually my second peer support team that I've been a part of. And I had a forensic training background with my degree in psychology. I always was interested in anything that intersected between psychology and criminal justice. My first job after getting my degree was in a prison in California, and I was able to join their peer team. I got a lot of perspective from that point of view of what the officers deal with that is traumatic, rather than just the citizens or just the inmates. The first responders have a hard time with certain things as well, but they have to have that sense of professionalism and decorum, and they have to have certain windows of safety that they can download their trauma to. And if their family isn't sufficient for them, or if they feel like they're overburdening their family or their personal support system, it's good to have a more official place to go. I had officers who would look both ways down the hallway before entering my office, and then they would come and talk and let me know what was going on with them. And I wanted to point out also that it's not only the critical incidents that we provide support for as a peer team, but also anything to do with work stress or personal stress that they might be carrying into their job or might be preoccupied about. When you're a first responder, your team has to be very tight knit and you have to rely on one another. And there's not a whole lot of room for drama. So we provide stress relief and support. My role in this team is to be the go-to therapist for first responders. I've taken a lot of trainings that were specific for trauma work with first responders and what unique issues that they face and challenges that they face. And I've been able to really expand upon my practice and my knowledge with supporting the local first responders.
It makes me think, too, of the work, at least I remember in corrections, the death by 1,000 paper cuts piece of the work. So a lot of the times people think of trauma as the big T trauma, the big critical incidents of the stuff that you see every once in a while. But it's the grind sometimes and the buildup of all the little things that you see during the day is the stuff that seems to get you, at least in the work that I saw in corrections. And I'm wondering how that ends up looking for you all on the team. Do you see that as well, or do you see it as a combination thereof?
Yeah, I hear all the time as a therapist that you've spent years and years doing your job and you've seen this many car crashes or this many domestic violence situations, but then why does that last one get you? So I do a lot of psychoeducation and a lot of support around the accumulation of trauma. And so it really can be a death by 1,000 cuts as opposed to one major significant issue.
What I like to refer to that is a boiling pot. And that analogy helps us when we're talking to folks, presenting training to folks about their mental health, is that boiling pot, you put ingredients in. And those ingredients could be a fight with your spouse or financial struggles, or it could be many different ingredients that you put in through life, because first responders are humans the same as everybody else is. So they have all the same stresses that everybody has, aside from trauma. And so all those things get put into this boiling pot, and it often doesn't take a very large ingredient or a big trauma to make that pot boil over. And once you boil over, that's when we have our significant stress reactions. And we have started this based on trauma, but what we've all realized through our own training and experience in being involved in the peer is that it really starts with the stuff that isn't trauma. It starts with those informal contacts, the ability to talk to people about what's going on, not only at work, but also home life, and just being that resource for people so that we help mitigate those ingredients that are going into their pot. The ingredients still go in, but maybe we can turn the heat down a little bit so the pot doesn't boil over in the end.
Yeah.
Kevin, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I was going to nudge him and have him give that analogy because that really paints a good picture of what our people deal with on a day-to-day basis. It is an accumulation of things over a long period of time. To be able to give them some skills and show them that they can get through these things without doing inappropriate things or take a path that is not healthy really is important to their success, in my opinion.
So what kind of work do you do with your folks to help them learn skills? Are they quiet conversations? Is it skill building? What does the peer support team look like in Pendleton?
Really, as peers, all we really are is giving people the ability to tell us what is going on in their life. We are sounding boards for them, basically. If they want some sort of direction or assistance with something, then we can help them with that. But really, just getting people to talk and open up about the experiences is huge leaps and bounds for them, because oftentimes in our line of work, it's suck it up, move on to the next. And the line that I really hate is people saying, "Are you good?" Because it's like asking, "Hey, how you doing today?" You don't expect somebody to go, "I'm really not doing very good." The proper answer is, "I'm fine." And you guys both move on, and that's it. And our job as peers is to really just be that person that people can talk to about their experiences, whether it's trauma related or it's stresses that are going on at work with the kids financially, and just being somebody that can listen and then maybe guide them to the appropriate resource. And in some cases, that appropriate resource is Lindsay. Yeah. So having Lindsay as our resource, who people are familiar with, she's come in and done ride-alongs with us. They know her face. They know that now she has this understanding of the first responder culture, really gives us a leg up to be able to move those people into additional care if needed.
Yeah. And Chris, not to keep going back to the old days, but I can remember when we would have a critical incident and they would call in, and no offense to Dr. Tice, but they call in a psychologist or a social worker or somebody outside of the department to come and do a debriefing, and you'd get this. And they'd just cross their arms and close their mouth and not say a word and go ahead and make me say something, as they were implying. And so we find that when you have a peer, somebody that understands what you've gone through and what you're going through, that have been there before, they're more likely to open up to that and just be able to spill their guts, if you will, and be able to get the stuff off of their chest. And if they need further assistance, we can send them to Dr. Tice or whoever else is available. But it's been good to have that element to our group.
Fire and police see things that other folks do not see, and see it on a regular basis. And it would be really difficult. I don't know if you all know, I was at the Oregon State Penitentiary for 7.5 years. And when you said the cross your arms, I was like, oh yeah. But having someone that gets it, is culturally competent, and is also a peer, makes a huge difference. Because trying to explain why you're upset and then trying to explain to somebody that has no idea what you're talking about, why you're upset, and then taking care of them if they react to why you're upset, and then you have to explain why it's upsetting. That's exhausting. Why do you want to have that conversation? So the importance of having peers that get it, so you don't have to do all that extra stuff to get to why it's bothering you, and also to have a clinician that also gets it, so the person can get down to what they need to talk about and not feel like they have to school their therapist on what is bothering them.
Absolutely.
As I'm listening to you, it seems like it's the big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. No question.
It is. And with our peer team, what we've established with the people that we have on the team and people that we're going to be adding soon is we've got this spreadsheet that identified the kind of things that they have experience with. For instance, divorce. It would be important to have a peer who has experience in that, assisting somebody who might be going through a divorce. So curtailing your peer team, utilizing the people that you have in the right places to help the people that just need that sounding board. As you said, culturally competent. I wouldn't be culturally competent in the realm of divorce. So it wouldn't make sense for me to be the peer in that scenario. So we have identified several categories of things that people might experience. I think as a peer team, it definitely helps to have just this vast array of knowledge within your peer team and people that have experience in a lot of different things to be able to help a lot of different people.
Yeah.
That's so great, because usually you hear about a peer team and there isn't that level of matching of peers. And so that is so fantastic that you've gone the extra mile and thought about that with folks. Lindsay, I'm wondering if you want to speak to being a therapist for the peer team and what that looks like when folks come to you, and how it's a little different for folks to have someone who gets it, who's culturally competent and working with first responders.
When I joined, what they were asking of me was, we just need a therapist that we can send referrals to for anyone who might be struggling in a deeper way and want therapy as opposed to just peer contact support. And so I signed on, and I already had been getting referrals from my bio on my website as a psychologist of different first responders, especially in the correctional side, who saw that I had worked in a prison too, and that I do understand what that life is like, because it's a completely different world. The rules are different, the culture is different, the way that you interact is different, the humor is different. And the humor is a commonality in all first responders, the dark humor. For a lot of people, they will tend to say, by the way, this joke that I just made, I don't mean that seriously. It was just humor. We say that with our guys. And I can say, oh, I know that. I understood. And so to be able to relate on that level helps them open up and feel comfortable. That's what I've heard the most at an intake process, or even just when they're on the phone asking for me, saying, I know that she has this background so that I'll be able to talk to her and she'll be able to pick up what I'm putting down.
I saw everybody nod and smile at the humor, including myself. It's definitely a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And it's a coping mechanism that can go horribly wrong if you're around people that don't understand that coping mechanism.
That's
Know your audience.
I'm curious, putting a human face on this, if you can talk about how having peer support has made a difference in your first responder community, particularly you, Kevin, from how it used to be, the old school way of doing things, to now. What is the difference that you have seen with the folks that you work with and how they've responded to having someone that they can talk to?
Well, probably the biggest difference is anytime there is a traumatic event or something that affects my fire people, particularly, I get calls from PD from time to time, but generally speaking, it's mostly from the fire department. I get a call from the duty officer saying what they've experienced, and I've got a young crew, or I've got a couple of guys that have never been involved with CPR, or the death of a baby, or somebody burned, or somebody mutilated, all these things that you experience over the course of your career. Could you come in and talk to them? And immediately you get that sense of a deep breath from those individuals where they feel comfortable sharing these things with you that they're experiencing. Some pull the old "I'm good" out of the pocket. And I said, no, come on, tell me how it really is, because I've been there. I know what you're going through. And seeing that cultural change has been really significant, change in the lives of these young people. And then the older ones as well. I'll never forget, this again goes back when I started doing critical incident stress debriefings. We had a guy who was pretty harsh. We called him the old leather firefighter. Didn't get rattled by much, wouldn't say anything. I started doing the debriefings, and we sat down with a group after a traumatic event, and this guy opened up, and all of our eyes went, wow. So we felt like we were making an impact there when it came to having the peer support and being able to allow guys to feel comfortable with where they're at and who their audience is. So I think that's been a big change, and it's been good to see that. But both sides of the fence, we see so much tragedy on a day-to-day basis, and to process that, you have to have an outlet of some sort. And I'm glad we have this team.
I'm also wondering, Tyler, what this has been like for law enforcement being able to have that outlet and how that's impacting officer wellness over the years. Folks have people that they can talk to and they can trust.
I think that's really something that's hard to measure, because what I've experienced, and especially on this side of the state, you're dealing with rural agencies pretty much in the entire side of the state. And with that, when you have a smaller group of people, it's a lot harder to break that cycle, I believe. And it's hard to measure. But what I'll say is that with law enforcement, from what I've seen in Kevin touched on trauma, but there's also a lot of informal peer contacts that happen on a day-to-day basis that even the folks who are saying peer team's great, good for you, good for those young guys, that's awesome, not for me, thanks. What I've found, not just in my agency, but other local police agencies that I've contacted, is that they will utilize you without even realizing it. So that's great that you guys do that. It's not for me. But let me tell you about what's going on over here. And so then you have that contact and they never know it. And it's great. I look at it from now a peer supporter and I'm like, haha, I got you. You talked to me. You opened up about this stuff and that's great. And it's confidential. It's something that we don't go share with other people. That's part of the peer team process is we all have to take this oath of confidentiality. It's not a rumor mill. We don't share with other people. But it is exciting when I see those older guys who say that I'm good and peer team's not for me. But let me tell you what happened. And I've seen a shift since we brought Lindsay to where now even some of those people who used to say peer support's not for me, good for you, are now coming around and going, hey, can I get Lindsay's phone number again? And you're like, oh yeah, no problem. It's almost like this passing in the hallway conversation that you have. While it's not measurable from my perspective, we are getting utilized more and more. And I think, again, we've talked about the addition of more people here in the near future. And I think that we're going to see a significant increase in the use of our peer team.
And to just dovetail off what he said, it's been a blessing to have this cross culture of peer support in that Tyler will see something in the field and give me a call and say, listen, one of your guys didn't seem like it was acting right on the scene. You might want to follow up, or you might want to follow up with this particular crew. And I'll do that. And somebody would be struggling, but had not reached out, but he noticed it, or somebody else had noticed it and reached out to me to make that contact. So that's exciting to me to see that element in place where we're helping each other out.
And I love to see the level of trust that they already have with their teams to play off in such a positive way, because they are able to make recommendations and those folks listen to them and say, okay, if you really think that I should seek therapy, then I will. Whereas before, they weren't even being given that feedback at all.
Yeah.
And it is really funny because a lot of times the first responders from the area come into my office, they usually tell me all the people that they let know that they were going to see me before I met them. They are pretty open and they like to let each other know, this worked for me, let it work for you.
Yeah.
I think that's really what we're trying to build as a peer team, is getting people to understand that talking about your stresses, working things out, and seeking help if you need it really needs to be the new normal to make our entire culture just a better place to live and work in.
Yeah.
And that's quite the culture shift from where it's been, right? That it's normal and it's something that we should be doing. And we saw that in the stats of first responders, divorce, suicide, depression, substance use rates, dismal. And then in corrections, even worse. And then death after retirement, also very high. Physical causes, just the wear, the tear in the body from all the stress. So to be able to change the course of normalizing the experience is fantastic. Lindsay, I think you would resonate with this, the hand on the doorknob comment as the person is leaving. And then that's the thing that you've been trying to talk about the entire session that you're not talking about.
Oh, yeah. We call it dropping the bomb.
That's where they're going to drop the bomb. So that made me think when you're saying that, Tyler, like, oh no, that's so great for them. But let me tell you what's really going on. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like you have definitely seen markers of how the culture is slowly shifting. And it sounds like you're adding on to the team as well here in the near future.
Yep. So we have interviews coming up with several people middle of this week, and they're all great candidates, and we hope to add every one of them. But we do an interview process just to make sure that we're vetting and getting the most appropriate people for the team. But all the applicants are great. Really excited to get new people added to our team.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be able to represent multiple agencies, whereas so far we've been just in Pendleton. So we're trying to expand into other areas of Eastern Oregon.
Oh, that's exciting. So not just Pendleton PD and fire department, but being able to expand into further agencies in your area.
Well, that's always kind of been our long-term vision, is to be able to reach out to other agencies in other cities that may have a similar situation that we've experienced, and they don't have the resources available to them for peer support. And we can take our team over there to wherever that might be and offer our services to them. I think it's important that we reach out to other agencies and other cities as well, because obviously this is not something that has been at the forefront of our thought process over the past several years. And to get that culture shift, exposing ourselves to those communities and other agencies is very important.
As an example, what we were able to do as a peer team is respond to some traumatic events that happened on the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And we assisted with the incidents involving the tribal police and the tribal fire department. Having the relationship that we have with them, their chief contacted us and said, hey, we had these incidents. Can you guys come support us? And we did that. Granted, those were trauma incidents. Now, what we have is we have a buy-in from them, and we have people that are now applying to be on our peer team. So not only are we going to have the ability to reach out with our crisis response, but we're going to have people embedded within their agency that are able to do those informal peer contacts on a day-to-day basis. And the tribal police department as a whole is going to be much healthier because they have that resource now.
That's so fantastic, and especially the day-to-day piece of it. I love the thought of having folks that are embedded for the folks who are like, I really don't think this is all, but by the way, so that is so exciting. When a new person comes on your team, what kind of training do they get for peer support?
Oregon has a statute that says they have to be certified, and that's really for the confidential piece. They have to get this certification, which is a 3-day training. And then they also have to sign the confidentiality agreement that says not only do they receive the training, but now they've signed this confidentiality agreement so that if that is ever broken, and it should never be, but if for whatever reason that confidentiality is broken, that person would be removed from the team because we have to be trustworthy in order to be good peer team members. That 3-day training is going to qualify them to be on our team, really. And then what we do is we do quarterly meetings with each other where we do updated training. Lindsay's a big help in that because being in the mental health profession, she's able to give us quality updates. And so she's going to be a huge resource to us moving forward as our team grows. A lot of our quarterly meetings the past couple of years have been how we're going to expand our team, what we're going to call the team, what we're going to do. Now we're moving into the phase of getting more people, and it's going to be more focused around updated training.
This makes me wonder too, Kevin, you were talking about how some agencies don't have the resources to be able to stand this up by themselves. And now that you're incorporating other agencies so you can all come together and collaborate. So I'm wondering, other agencies out there, particularly agencies that are in Central and Eastern Oregon that may be more rural and not have as many people, what can other agencies learn from you and learn from your experiences if they wanted to start a team like this? What are things that definitely didn't work as you were coming together and trying to figure it out? And what are things that have worked well that you say, if you're going to start a team like this, what do you definitely need to be doing?
It's been a long process, just trying to figure out what direction that we wanted to go and how we wanted to melt the two, police, fire, and EMS together. That's probably was our, I don't know if it even was a hurdle, but trying to find people that are interested in that. And I'm the only one from the fire side that has been involved up to this point. However, we do have some that are coming on board or that are interviewing for the process. But I think the biggest hurdle is just getting the word out that you can do this, even if you're a small community and the resources are available to you. And we would love to come. And we actually did a 2-night presentation here last spring, and we invited both police and fire agencies to come and sit in on it. We did it on 2 nights so that the shifts could come in. And there was 5 of us that talked, Dr. Tice and Tyler, myself, and 2 others. And we talked about what the process was. And we invited their families, their spouses, and adult children or older children. There was some really eye-opening thoughts from the spouses and such that they didn't realize what we faced on a day-to-day basis because they don't want to share that with their spouses. But to have that available, we could go into other communities that are smaller that don't have the resources and offer those kinds of things to them so that they have the ability to build something that would be viable for them.
Dr. Tice, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around lessons learned in your collaboration.
I think something that stands out to me when I'm working with first responders in my practice is that majority of the time, what they're there to address is not a big T trauma. It's usually something with their family system or something with their history or their childhood and how that is impacting their ability to work, or maybe their work is their happy place and it is a trauma-ridden job naturally, but they really feel called toward it and a passion for it. And that is sometimes their reprieve from their problems in life. To be able to be as wide open as we are and as versatile as we're working on being to address all various types of stressors for first responders as humans is what I found the focus has been.
I'm wondering, are there pieces of this process that we haven't touched on yet that you want to make sure that our listening audience hears about?
We're working really hard to get our respective agencies more and more involved. For instance, the last couple of years, we've put on breakfasts for the fire department and for the police department and just exposed the team to them to give them an idea of the faces that are on the team. And we're not there to judge them or try to counsel them in any way other than if they want to seek Dr. Tice's expert opinion. So that's been a little bit difficult. And so we're hoping that getting more people on our team from the different agencies will bolster that and give them some more confidence in what the team really represents and how we want to be a support to them and not just trying to meddle into their personal lives, if that makes sense.
And we're also trying to build ourselves in a little bit more directly to the agencies and their procedures. So we have been working on developing a call tree and identifying what are some things that dispatchers would maybe directly contact Tyler or any other first responders for if there is a critical incident, and having that be an official call for the peer team to be there just in case.
So you're looking at the possibility of getting dispatched out through 911 to certain incidents.
Yeah, so a big part of responding to traumas is trauma is time sensitive. I think Lindsay could probably tell you a lot more about that. But what we have now is definitely getting better. But with our critical incidents, we have a lot of late responses because it's something happens and then the peer team finds out about it. And then we're trying to play catch up and trying to develop that, like you said, that call tree where if it's this kind of incident, you automatically make a phone call to me or to Kevin and let us triage whether or not, yeah, this is something that we're going to call some people out to go out to the scene, or we're going to call some people to go out before the end of shift. And we haven't really been able to implement that yet. But I think once we do, we're going to see a lot better response from our critical incidents because the people are going to get the defusings that they need and they're going to be able to return to work sooner if the trauma makes them not be able to work through it. The other thing we've done, and our chief is on board, and hopefully once we get everybody else, the other agency heads would be on board. I would hope any agency head, if there are any listening to this, that they'll understand that when you have people on your team that are involved in really significant trauma incidents, it should be just like they're injured. And they should be allowed to go home, even if it's just for the rest of the shift. But oftentimes we have this major thing happened and everything's calm now. And so you got to go back to work, and we go back to work. Maybe our detectives have come in and they're handling the situation, or a mop-up crew for the fire department. But the EMS guy is still responding on ambulance calls while he's still trying to process these traumas. And so I think that having this call tree is going to benefit our employees a lot more. And granted, we're talking about significant trauma issues. It's not like this happens every day and we're going to run into an employee shortage because we got a bunch of people off work. These are few and far between, obviously. But I think overall, it's going to increase the health of the department, both fire and police. I think the other thing that we are doing is also including our dispatchers in that, because they're oftentimes a first responder that gets forgotten about. And they have this significant trauma aspect and stress aspect that we don't ever get to see. And it's because they're dealing with things they don't even get a look at. So all they get to use is their imagination. And when the phone call is hung up because the first responders are on scene, they don't even know the end to that situation. And so again, their imagination runs away, and then trauma can be created even when there wasn't one. I think bringing the dispatchers on, getting our agency heads to also recognize that there are times when it's important to send our people home that are involved in these situations. It's a big task, but I think it's one that we're looking to also change our culture on.
Yeah. And just to dovetail off what Tyler said, we have to ask ourselves, if we've gone through a traumatic event, are we prepared to go through that same event the next call? And that's where recognizing the need to send somebody home comes in. If you were to get dispatched to a similar call right after you had that call, the process would just become cumulative and more difficult to overcome. So that's a good point that Tyler's making.
Well, even if you're dispatched to a call that's nowhere near as serious, I would imagine it would be really difficult to be present and focused on whatever you're being called out to if you're still trying to process this trauma that you've just gone through.
From the law enforcement side, you can see this a lot. You watch any news story and you see police officers who are acting almost irate at people for very minimal things. I watch that from a totally different perspective. My first thought whenever I see that is, what is this guy dealing with that he just blew up on this person for not wearing a seatbelt? And obviously, sometimes it's simply that the guy's not very nice and shouldn't have a badge, but that happens. But also from the peer side of it, I'm like, okay, who's failing this guy? He didn't just pop off at this person randomly and become this person on this particular traffic stop. Right. Something led up to this, whether it was all these stressors have accumulated and now his pot is boiling over, or something just happened 2 hours ago on his shift that he's still trying to process and now trying to deal with another situation that he has no control over and he's losing his temper. I've noticed that from the law enforcement side. That's where my mind goes to as a peer support officer.
And a lot of what we are focused on trying to provide and trying to get better at as a team is not just reacting to critical incidents or when people seek us for help, but also on prevention and on advocating for our personnel. We try to create this call tree to go out to some calls automatically because we're trying to prevent you from getting PTSD and we're trying to prevent you from having nightmares that night. A lot of times officers, they're in their adrenaline reaction and they're in their work mode, and you know what you're doing and you know what you're seeing and you've seen it a million times, and you don't recognize whether it's gonna hit you, and it might not hit you for another couple weeks or a couple months. But if we can get in there and help you process with it and say, slow down, let's take the time. How did this affect you? Did this remind you of your own children? Did this remind you of something that happened to you or to a loved one? Things like that can help you process it so that it doesn't turn into PTSD, which is really unaddressed trauma that is crying out to be addressed. We also can play a role letting the superiors know in your department, hey, this person's not going to feel comfortable letting you know that they need a break, but they need a break. They're not ready to go back on duty yet. Let's find something else for them to do, or let's call somebody else in.
Lindsay, I'm also wondering if you want to add to what Tyler was talking about, someone going to a pretty awful call, maybe right then going somewhere else or 2 hours ago, and reacting in a way that maybe they could just not be a very nice person and shouldn't have a badge, as Tyler was saying. Or it could be that they're reacting in a way that isn't normal for them because of what they're trying to process and go through. I'm wondering if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, that's a pretty common reaction for somebody who is trying really hard to stuff down something that's bothering them and trying really hard to ignore that. Part of what we want to be able to do is give them a space to unpack that so that they can be ready to kind of clean their slate and be on for their next call if that's what's required of them that day. And we have a variety of levels of emotional intelligence, right? So we have some first responders who might be very attuned to themselves and very able to express, all right, I'm on the drive to the next call, but I'm really still bothered. So I'm going to be really self aware about how I interact with someone. But then we have people that might just either expect themselves to never be affected and then they don't know why they're being short and irritable with someone, or they are, like I said, trying to stuff it down and trying to pretend that they're okay because they feel like they have to act in a certain way. We don't want it to get to that point. We don't want it to get to where you are having negative interactions with members of the community and damaging your own reputation and damaging your standing in the department. We try to help people have a space to unpack so that they don't end up having a shorter temper or hypervigilance, being too quick to draw assumptions that may be untrue and may lead to unsafe situations.
And on top of that, we talk about the fire department works a 48-hour shift. So if it happens in that first 10 or 12 hours, they still have another 36 hours to go or what have you. And they have to process that while they're thinking about the next call. So it's important that we provide them with a safe environment that they can either go home or take time away, whether it's a few hours or just go and make sure they're making good decisions and their thought process is in the right direction rather than just internalizing all this stuff. And that's why it's important for incident commanders. They will call me as soon as they can to come in and do a quick debrief with our guys and gals to make sure they're doing okay and processing this. I'm not sure how the PD does it, but that's how the fire side does it.
While we're talking about this, it also makes me think about what you were talking about with dispatch and incorporating dispatch into peer support and how important that is for dispatch callers. And I had a moment of like, my goodness, yes, we do take that for granted that dispatch gets a phone call and here's all the stuff coming up to when first responders go out. And then you don't know. It's a big question mark of what happens. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little bit and how you bring dispatch in and work things through with them, because I'm wondering if it's a slightly different kind of conversation than it would be with someone who's been on the scene and saw how everything went down.
Yeah, it is a completely different conversation. My wife was a dispatcher for 13 years, so I have got the ins and outs of how dispatchers think and feel from her perspective. It's really interesting because oftentimes what the dispatchers are hearing on the phone and what people are telling them is entirely not at all what's going on scene. And that's oftentimes hard for just any officer or maybe even a fireman to understand. We get told all these things when we're going to a scene, and then we get there and we're like, that's not at all what happened. And it's like, okay, this is weird. I thought somebody said somebody was getting beat with a stick. Well, no, somebody just said they had a stick. And it's like, okay, but we don't stop and consider that the 911 call itself may have been a hysterical child on the phone saying that somebody was getting beat up with a stick. And that's why when I talked about earlier about this perceived trauma that they have, everything that goes on is all in their mind just based on what they're being told. It is going to be really important for us to get our dispatchers on board with the peer team, being able to have somebody that is within the dispatch center that can communicate with these folks that are having these hard calls, even just these stressful calls where they can just simply say, man, that was crazy. And getting our police officers to understand that, hey, sometimes when you get dispatched to these crazy calls, it helps to call up and let them know like, hey, this is what happened, or this is the end result of this call, because they like to have that finality. They like to have some closure of these calls that we're responding to because they don't often get it. And then in the 911 center, what happens, just like we talked about, responding to the next call, they get the next phone call, they get the next 911 call. Now they're doing a whole different thing when they're doing it for somebody who called because their boyfriend won't leave the house and they live together. And now the dispatcher's getting angry because she has to be on the phone, or he has to be on the phone with this person dealing with an issue they could really deal with themselves. And they're still trying to process what happened on the previous 911 call. And being behind that closed door, nobody ever knows that stress is going on, except for the dispatchers. So having them embedded within our team, having that resource within the dispatch center, I think is going to improve the mental health of our dispatch center significantly.
I just read an article about 911 calls for things that are not emergencies, but the callers are convinced that they are emergencies, and what that's like for the dispatchers and how that's been on the rise. And emotionally what that's like for the dispatchers. And so that's what that made me think of, Tyler, when you were talking about that, is you could be a call, like you said, with a hysterical child saying someone's being beaten with a stick. And then the next phone call is, are the fireworks this evening? Since Halloween's on a Sunday, is it going to be celebrated on Saturday? And what a kind of mental shift that would be. The dispatch gets that as well as other first responders on calls.
Let's throw on top of that with our particular dispatch center at Umatilla County. Not only are they dealing with those phone calls, now they're also taking radio traffic from multiple agencies across the entire county, from officers who are getting annoyed because the dispatcher is not answering their traffic while they're trying to answer the questions about when the fireworks are going to happen. The amount of stress that occurs in a dispatch center is really unbelievable, and nobody could really fathom what it is until you work there. I truly believe that. As much as police officers and dispatchers bicker with each other, they are what makes the world go round in the first responder realm. They're the first line to information that we get, even though it's wrong a bunch of the time. It's not their fault it's wrong. It's the information that they're getting told on the phone. And the same thing with the firemen, just do an incredible job. The police, we really like to give them crap about being second responders. Me especially, I love good police fire jokes, but I always make sure on scene to tell them that they're my heroes, because they really are incredible people that do incredible things. From my perspective, I started the peer thing from a police standpoint, but I'm so excited to have dispatchers and firemen and EMS join the team because we're all on the same team.
Yeah.
I love hearing about all the collaboration within your agencies and figuring out who are the hidden populations within first responders that, frankly, we forget about. And how now you're starting to collaborate within your own agencies and within a small area. And now you're even starting to expand that even more within the county with tribal police and fire, which is really exciting. Lindsay, I'm wondering, do you want to add any thoughts about dispatchers and working with dispatchers and how that's a little bit different than working with police or fire or EMS?
I actually haven't gotten any dispatchers on my caseload yet over the years, but I have had family members of dispatchers, and they obviously are focusing on their own issues, but they sometimes will comment like, my family member is anxious all the time and is on a short fuse. And I think it's because of their job, but they won't talk about it because they say it's under control. So I think they have a very similar dynamic as far as what they feel their expectations are and whether they feel like they can talk about it. So again, anybody who deals with the first responding world, whether you are in a uniform or not in a uniform, if you are the tow truck driver, if you are an ER nurse, any of those other areas, if you deal with trauma regularly at your job, we want to be here for you.
I think that is a beautiful place for us to stop and think about if there are any last thoughts for our listeners.
We just appreciate the opportunity to get the word out, and hopefully this will be a springboard for the rest of our listening audience to understand this is a great possibility and it's a great resource to have for your respective communities. It's important that you find healthy outlets, and we've seen some results from that as well. So it's doable and very beneficial from our perspective.
I think I just would also add that really to identify what peer support is and isn't, we are not folks who gather in a circle and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And that's oftentimes what people think we do. Oh, that's a peer support team. And that's not at all what we do. It's really just having people with similar experiences who you can talk to about similar experiences. Period. End of story. People that have resources and access to better resources if you need it. That's it.
We do try to sing once in a while, but it's mostly off key.
And it's usually not Kumbaya like that. That's
No.
How about you, Lindsay? Do you have any takeaways for the listening audience?
I think that they gave a great summary.
I think for me, listening to y'all, I'm just struck by the level of collaboration in your agency and across agencies and in the wider community. And I think sometimes it's thought that in rural and frontier Oregon, this kind of collaboration and these kind of programs aren't possible. And y'all are living proof that not only is it possible, but you're all able to grow and say, hey, we need to include these folks and we need to include these folks. And what a wonderful resource this is for first responders in your area and how exciting it is. And you are living proof that this kind of collaboration and these fantastic programs are possible in rural and frontier areas.
Yeah, and another thing that I'd like to add, Chris, is the fact that my spouse is so supportive of this group. I was ready to just say, I bow out today. And she goes, no, you need to go up there. Tyler offered you to go up. So she's really supportive of this. And I know the rest of the group has that support as well. So that's been exciting to have that element as well.
Supportive loved ones really do make the difference. That is for sure. That is for sure. Well, I thank you so much for your time today, Lindsay, Kevin, and Tyler. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to talk about your team.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it very much.
The Center Collaborative is a production of the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, a specialized division of Greater Oregon Behavioral Health Incorporated. It is produced by me, Chris Thomas, with production assistance from Patrick Kennedy. Music by Pat Mulvihill and Patrick Kennedy. Subscribe to the Center Perspective using your favorite app. To learn more about criminal justice and behavioral health integration in Oregon, visit the Center's website at ocbhji.org. You can also find us on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us. Join us next time as we chat with the experts about programs and partnerships that work within this complex and yet compelling field. Thank you for joining our conversation.